Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie. And in this video, I'm going to be looking at the week starting on Monday, September the 23rd, 2024. So let me just give you an idea about how this video is going to be structured. I'm going to be starting off by looking at the main events this week, the main astrological events. These are the events that I consider to be important. And then I'm going to focus on one aspect. And the one aspect I want to focus on is the opposition between Mercury and Neptune, which takes place, I think, on about Wednesday, the 25th. And I want to consider what this opposition might be all about, and what it means to have Mercury opposition Neptune in your horoscope. So that's going to be sort of my main focus. And having done that, I'm going to do the I Ching for the week. So I'm going to do an I Ching reading with 4 sections: general, money, career and business, and then relationships. So that's the structure of a video, and I'm hoping this video is going to be fairly brief. So anyway, let's see what's happening this week. Just a reminder, if you like this video, I'd be very grateful if you were to really indicate that you did like this video. If you're not subscribed, I'd be really happy if you were to subscribe, because apparently it does make a big difference. Okay, so let's have a look at what's happening this week. So here are the start positions set for New York. Sort of, the beginning of Monday, midnight on Monday the 23rd. By the way, there is a glyph for Mercury, and that is the planet Neptune. Just a reminder that I'm going to be looking at the opposition between the Sun and Neptune. Sorry, not the Sun, Mercury and Neptune. And I'll be considering what it might mean. And I actually will have a few example charts and one event that I just wanted to quickly look at. So, starting position for the beginning of the week, and you will see right at the beginning of the week, set for New York, Venus has switched signs. Venus is at 0 degrees Scorpio, and that is a big change. Venus has been moving through the last degrees of Libra last week, and then now it's switched. And it is a big change because Mercury in late Libra was really very strong. It was making a trine to Jupiter, it was in its own sign, and it was in mutual reception by exaltation with Saturn. Then Venus makes a switch and it just loses its dignity. And at the same time, it moves into Scorpio. Scorpio is, of course, a sign where Venus is in its detriment. So things connected with Venus may take a plunge this week. It may no longer be a good time to be doing activities connected perhaps with beauty or decoration. Or perhaps it might not be such a good idea to buy clothes, maybe. And in terms of relationships, things might start to become a little more complicated with Venus moving into Scorpio. And in a sort of political sense, you could argue that this is not good for Kamala Harris. Now, my logic would be that Saturn is the traditional ruler of the Democrats. I think it was the astrological writer Barbara Waters wrote a book, I think it was Astrology, on the Judgment of Events, I think. And she associated Saturn with the Democrats and Jupiter with the Republicans. I mean, I did do a video on this subject. And so when Venus moves into Scorpio, Venus is no longer in mutual reception by exaltation with Saturn. So it's not just that Venus weakens, Saturn weakens as well. And that Venus mutual reception with Venus was good for Kamala Harris. Venus, natural ruler of women. And so that was certainly helpful. She did okay in a debate. Most people seem to think she beat Trump in a debate. And so luck seemed to be on her side. But with Venus moving into Scorpio, she might lose some of that luck. So I don't think it's going to be quite so easy for Kamala Harris as it has been over the last few weeks. So that is one possible manifestation of Venus moving into Scorpio. So anyway, so that happens, well, late on Sunday or into Monday, depends on your time zone. Monday, if you're in the UK, for example, it happens at 3:36 in the morning. So if you're in Europe, by the time you get up on Monday morning, you should find that Venus really is in Scorpio. You'll have to wait until the afternoon in Australia or New Zealand on Monday to experience Venus being in Scorpio. Then later on in the week, on Wednesday, we get two aspects. We get Mercury opposition Neptune. And I will be talking about Mercury-Neptune opposition in a moment. But, Mercury is the planet of communication. It's a planet of thought, and it's opposition Neptune. So there may be a little bit of confusion there, a deception. It's perhaps about the way we communicate and the kind of messages we deliver, and it may be just a situation where we're not entirely clear and people might misunderstand our meaning, although some people could be quite deceptive with Mercury opposition Neptune. And at the same time, Mars makes a semi-square to Uranus. Now, actually, I think Mars semi-square Uranus is probably the most important aspect of the week. And so you can see this Mars, there's Mars and there's Uranus gone. So when Mars gets to about 12 degrees Cancer, it's 45 degrees away from Uranus. And we have to remember that we had a square between Mars and Uranus in the middle of July. I think that was right. That was not a square, I mean a conjunction. We had a conjunction between Mars and Uranus in the middle of July, and that was around the time when Donald Trump had that assassination attempt, that bullet that hit his ear. It was a really close run thing, and that Mars conjunct Uranus was exactly on Donald Trump's midheaven at the time. So we get that kind of energy repeating itself. I'm not saying it's necessarily going to impact Donald, but it might. That is a possibility if it's particularly close to his midheaven. So that's something we do have to perhaps look out for on around Wednesday. But Mars semi-square Uranus in general it's quite a violent aspect, and it can bring unpleasant things in its wake. And I will be doing a video on Mars semi-square Uranus in a couple of days' time. Then on Thursday, Mercury moves into Libra. So we have Venus moving out of Libra and then Mercury moving into Libra. And I think that Mercury into Libra, well, certainly if you're an air sign, Gemini, Libra, Aries, Mercury moving into Libra is probably a good thing. Mercury in Libra likes to be reasonable, and it's a time when people are doing their best to get on with each other. But Mercury in Libra is not a particularly deep and intense placement. It does like to sort of drift on the surface a little, just light conversation, not dwelling on any particular subject, and you don't want things to be too complicated. But in terms of what we say and what we're communicating, I think that the emphasis is going to be on harmony and balance. And then on Saturday, we've got Venus sesquiquadrate Jupiter. Venus 135 degrees from Jupiter. That would be what you'd have Venus at around 5 Scorpio, 5 or 6 Scorpio, 6 Scorpio, making a sesquiquadrate to Jupiter at what, sort of 21 Gemini, something like that. And so with that aspect, maybe a certain temptation to overdo it. It can be a little bit overindulgent, that Venus sesquiquadrate Jupiter, but it's quite a generous combination. And you could take the view it doesn't matter that it's a sesquiquadrate. The point is it's a dynamic aspect, and so with Venus and Jupiter making a dynamic aspect, there's a possibility that we can be generous and we can be optimistic, and perhaps we can make other people feel better about themselves. So that's the broad picture of this week. I do think that the Mars semi-square Uranus is the most important aspect aspect this week, and I will be making a video when I look at what's happening on Wednesday the 25th. So do look out for that. As far as Mercury opposition Neptune is concerned, now this aspect represents, on a personal level, I suppose it represents our thought processes and the way we talk and the way we think about the world. And like every astrological aspect, it's so difficult to look at it in isolation. You have to consider the individual circumstances, what someone is doing. Is it going to be negative and is it going to be positive? Yeah, it kind of depends what you do with it. But if Mercury is about the way we think and the way we perceive, you could say that Mercury opposition Neptune may have a spirituality to it, an ability to see beyond the material plane. And maybe one can connect Mercury opposition Neptune with some kind of psychic ability, or certainly being very sensitive and being able to pick up the vibes. So that's certainly positive. But Mercury is also about trying to process the world, trying to understand the world. And so if Neptune is opposition Mercury, there may be confusion. Maybe one is looking at the world through rose-tinted glasses, and one is not actually seeing the world as it actually is. And that could mean that if you've got Mercury opposition Neptune, you could eventually get yourself into trouble. And Neptune as a planet is connected with drugs and alcohol. So in certain cases, Mercury might be attracted to substances, and I suppose there could be a danger of substance abuse there. I mean, all things being equal. Quite why? Well, Mercury does like to be entertained. I mean, that's one reason why. But Mercury it's often about how the brain works or how the brain doesn't work. And so Mercury opposition Neptune says cognitive processes upset by use of alcohol or drugs. That is certainly a way in which Mercury opposition Neptune could function. Though Mercury is also very creative. It can be about writing. And so if you've got Mercury opposition Neptune, that might make you into a very good writer, a very effective writer, someone with a vivid imagination. And it doesn't matter whether you're writing fiction or non-fiction, you can still perhaps come up with a good story, a story that does show maybe a vivid imagination. It's perhaps not always 100% truthful, but it's still there, and I think that many people will find that interesting. So those are a few thoughts about Mercury opposition Neptune, and I now want to just look at some examples of people who do have this aspect. Now, a chart I looked at very recently was that of actor Alec Baldwin. I don't want to spend very long on his chart, not least because I have just looked at his chart, but Alec Baldwin has Mercury opposition Neptune. You see he's got Mercury probably in Taurus. I suppose it could be in Aries if he was born at the beginning of the day, but I don't know how fast Mercury is going when he was born. There's his Mercury conjunct the South Node, and that's opposition Neptune. So Mercury conjunct the South Node could be about someone who has thought processes, perhaps from a previous lifetime or from the past, which he finds it difficult to get out of. And Mercury conjunct the South Node opposition Neptune. What is he thinking about? How is he communicating? But I suppose if you're an actor, a sort of Hollywood star, having Mercury opposition Neptune must be useful. It allows you perhaps to pretend to be someone you're not. And if you want to be an actor, that's what you've got to do. There's got to be a certain sense of make-believe, which Mercury opposition Neptune can achieve. But with Mercury opposition Neptune, there could be moments where you don't actually understand what you're doing and you don't understand why things are happening. And so when you think about that event when he shot someone on a film set in Rust, that film was he trying to make, was it Rust? It was sort of a Western. And when he did that, you might say, well, it was a time when that Mercury opposition Neptune was very active. He didn't really understand what was happening, and he fired a gun which just happened to have a live round in it. And so that might be a way in which Mercury-Neptune works. Another person who had a Mercury-Neptune opposition was Barry Humphries, the Australian comedian and drag artist, famous for Dame Edna. And this is someone whose big thing was having different personae, being Dame Edna, being, what was his name? Celeste Patterson, the cultural attaché at the court of St. James or something like that, wasn't it? So he had all these personae, and that was part of his act. And I suppose if you've got Mercury opposition Neptune, and there is his Mercury is at 15 Pisces, opposition Neptune in Virgo, you can see Mercury in Pisces. I know that Mercury is, in a way, is not very well placed in Pisces, but it's in its detriment, and I think it's fallen as well. So probably Pisces is a worse sign for Mercury to be in, but Pisces is a mutable sign and it has a certain versatility. And so you can imagine someone who has Mercury in Pisces being a good mimic and being able to adopt different personae, and particularly as its opposition Neptune. And that Neptune is in Virgo. And I suppose the details of these different personae, maybe in his case, he was able to sort out. And I suppose it must have been a lot of preparation being sort of Dame Edna. Now, Mercury opposition Neptune can also indicate alcohol abuse, and I believe at one time in his life, I think maybe in the 60s and the 70s, he had major problems with alcohol, to the extent that I think alcohol nearly killed him, and in the end he was able to deal with the problem, and I think he was a teetotaler for the last part of his life, but that is an aspect of Mercury opposition Neptune. I talked about drug issues with Mercury opposition Neptune, and it can be alcohol issues. So that does seem to fit him quite well. Now, Mercury opposition Neptune can be about someone who is an effective writer, and as far as fiction is concerned, C.S. Lewis, author of The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe, had Mercury opposition Neptune. I mean, I don't really know a great deal about C.S. Lewis, but there is his Mercury at 27 Sagittarius, opposition Neptune at 23, 24 Gemini. So you could say at the most positive level, Mercury in Sagittarius is about someone who is thinking beyond his immediate environment. I mean, C.S. Lewis had a lot of stuff in Sagittarius. I mean, he had Mercury, Saturn, Venus, Sun, and Uranus in Sagittarius. And perhaps that's just a reminder that Sagittarius is a sign that is quite moral, is quite religious. Jupiter rules Sagittarius. He was a Christian. One of these sort of Oxford Christians. There was a sort of generation of people like Tolkien, because he was a friend of Tolkien. Tolkien was a Christian, and C.S. Lewis was. And if you've read the Narnia Chronicles, you can see that it's a very, very Christian message. So it runs right through the 7 books. It's not just a fairy story. There is a moral message, which probably is not particularly popular at the moment, but it's very much there. And of course, he wrote some non-fiction talking about the nature of evil, and he wrote something about the devil. What is it? The screw tape something or other. I mean, I don't know the details about C.S. Lewis. But that's his Sagittarian element, the Sagittarian side to his personality, having a very moral message. And if you look at the morality of, if you go through the Narnia Chronicles, what happens to the children one meets in the Lan Witch and the Wardrobe, and what happens to them through the books, and some of it is quite unfair, actually, and so but it does demonstrate his moral views, and some of his moral views are really interesting. Of C.S. Lewis, I think he was talking about this child and how this child had weird parents, and the parents were weird because they were vegetarian and they didn't smoke. And I thought that was really interesting. Not smoking as just a sign that you're just a weirdo. And I suppose that was the 1950s. And so his Mercury opposition Neptune, I think, just allowed him to create stories. But perhaps because Mercury was in Sagittarius, he was able to create stories which were sort of very imaginative and were to create whole new worlds. Another writer of non-fiction, I think, is Omid Scobie. It's someone else I don't really know much about, but I think that Omid Scobie wrote books relating to Prince Harry and Meghan, and he wrote these books which were supportive of their case. And he has Mercury opposition Neptune, and I suppose Omid Scobie is quite a controversial character. He's sort of very much into sort of celebrities and showbiz, and I think he has a background in I believe in tabloid journalism, and he was able to move beyond that into writing, and of course being a very successful writer. And there's his Mercury in Gemini, someone who is able to write a lot. I mean, I've got Mercury in Gemini. I'm just a hopeless writer. I just cannot get the words out. And as for fiction, I can't do it. Absolutely cannot write fiction. I tried, but it's just hopeless. You need a certain way of doing things to do fiction, but that's not me. But anyway, his Mercury in Gemini is opposition Neptune in Sagittarius, so I suppose the glamour of celebrities and people like Harry is something he likes to write about. So I would have thought that Mercury opposition Neptune does fit. Now, what about people of a more political bent? Ngo Dinh Diem. I find Ngo Dinh Diem quite fascinating. So Ngo Dinh Diem, he was president of South Vietnam. He was assassinated in 1963, and many people make a connection between Ngo Dinh Diem and Volodymyr Zelensky. I think there are some important parallels between the two. They were both hailed as being, one was the church, Zelensky compared, being described as a Churchill of Ukraine or whatever. Ngo Dinh Diem was a Churchill of Asia because he was fighting communism. And Ngo Dinh Diem is sort of infamous for, he was a Catholic, and he had sort of created a society that was antagonistic towards Buddhists. I mean, South Vietnam was a split society religiously between Roman Catholicism and Buddhism, and it was on his watch that we saw the infamous picture of the burning monk. And he doesn't have any water in his chart, like Zelensky doesn't have any water in his chart. And so there's a certain lack of sensitivity there. And there's his Mercury in Capricorn trying to organize his country. Or he thinks he's getting it right, Mercury in Capricorn. But that Mercury in Capricorn at 1 Capricorn is opposition Neptune at 27, 28 Gemini. And so Mercury in Capricorn is perhaps undermined by Neptune in Gemini. And in the end, I suppose he didn't know what was going on, and he didn't know that there was perhaps a plot to assassinate him, which eventually came into fruition. And of course, that plot to assassinate him was supported by the CIA. So it was the CIA that played a role in killing this man, even though Lyndon B. Johnson had hailed him as being the Churchill of Asia just a couple of years before his assassination. So it's always dangerous being an ally of the United States, because the United States can turn against you very quickly. And turning to another politician, I haven't looked at her chart before, and her name is Kaja Kallas, and she's Estonian, and she used to be the Estonian Prime Minister, and she is I believe about to be appointed what is in effect the European Union's foreign minister, and she is virulently anti-Russian, a virulent supporter of the war in Ukraine. Even though Estonia is a small country, doesn't have many people. She's introduced restrictions against Russians travelling in the country. I believe it was her that really looked forward to the possibility of Russia being broken up. I mean, I suppose she's probably I think she's got family history of people being sent to the Gulag in the 40s, maybe, and so maybe she's sort of got a bit of a ancestral grudge there. And she's supposedly going to be running Europe's foreign policy. I think that's a bit dangerous with Mercury in Gemini, but Mercury conjunct Black Moon Lilith, true Black Moon Lilith. Do you really want someone running Europe's foreign policy who's got Mercury conjunct Black Moon Lilith? I mean, I don't have a time of birth, but Mercury conjunct Black Moon Lilith, you can imagine that her thought processes could be contaminated perhaps by the past. And also by Neptune opposition Mercury. And it's a nice Mercury in Gemini. I'm sure she's a very intelligent woman, very, well qualified. She speaks lots of languages, Mercury in Gemini, but Neptune undermines it all. So when considering what to do about Russia and how to relate to the war in Russia, you could see that Mercury opposition Neptune just she might really not know what's going on, and in her, or rather, she has fantasies about what's perhaps going on in Russia and what is possible, and her fantasies might, I suppose, in the end, trip her up a bit. Another politician, Tony Blair. So there's Tony Blair. Tony Blair had. Now, Tony Blair is a bit of an enigma to me. I mean, he didn't have any planets in water signs. So you normally think with planet not having any planets in water signs that someone with that would perhaps not be particularly sensitive. But clearly, Tony Blair was a brilliant politician, whatever you think of him, and he had Mercury opposition Neptune. Oh, he still has it, actually. He hasn't gone away. So there's his Mercury in Aries and opposition Neptune. So I would guess that Mercury opposition Neptune, in many cases, he was able to use that Mercury Neptune very effectively he was able to perhaps be convincing and persuasive, and able to persuade Britain to vote for him. I mean, he won, I think, how many elections did he win? He won 3 elections in a row, 1997, 2001 and 2005. So he was convincing, but occasionally he got his facts wrong. I mean, he's, of course, supported America's invasion of, or intervention or whatever, in Iraq in 2003 against these supposed weapons of mass destruction, and he was, I suppose, able to persuade himself that it was the right thing to do. And in Britain, he hasn't really been forgiven for that, not really. And still, that just might be how his Mercury opposition Neptune is working. But on the plus side, maybe it helped give him a certain amount of sensitivity, which was able to inform the way he was able to communicate. And going back to a Ukrainian theme, Stefan Bandera, the sort of founding father of Ukrainian right-wing nationalism, had Mercury opposition Neptune, born January the 1st, 1909, and that Mercury he had Mercury exactly opposition Neptune. So Mercury conjunct Uranus as well. So Mercury conjunct Uranus is someone who, in Capricorn, he has interesting ideas, and he's inspired by things. And with Mercury opposition Neptune, he's caught up in a fantasy about Ukrainian sort of independence and national identity. Although, when you think about Ukrainian independence, actually his main concern was not actually, to begin with, wasn't actually the independence from the Soviet Union. It was actually independence from Poland, and I think he was involved with a lot of terroristic attacks on Poles in the interwar period. I think he was one stage sent to prison by the Poles, and he sort of, Mercury opposition Neptune is kind of playing games as well. So when the Nazis took everything over, Stepan Bandera was trying to play games with the Nazis. He said he wanted an independent Ukraine, but he was trying to do a deal with the Nazis. In fact, I think the Nazis sent him to a concentration camp for a time. So it is kind of dangerous. But Mercury opposition Neptune is always playing games, and after the Second World War, he was playing games. He was supported by British intelligence and American intelligence, because he had information about the Soviet Union. So he wasn't sent back to the Soviet Union. Of course, he would have been, I suppose, executed straight away if he'd gone back to the Soviet Union. So he played his games, but Mercury opposition Neptune often at the same time tells us something about his eventual death. Neptune is the planet of poisons and gas, drugs, and he died of cyanide poisoning, and he was murdered with cyanide. The Soviets sent someone to kill him, and I think some cyanide gas was sprayed at him, or some cyanide dust. I think the idea was it was supposed to give the impression that he had a heart attack, and that there was supposed to be no traces of a cyanide. But I think they found out pretty quickly that it was cyanide that killed him. So that sort of tells us something perhaps about Mercury opposition Neptune. As far as events are concerned, I just want to look at one event. Remember the blowing up of a Nord Stream 2 pipeline? We don't know who did it. I mean, I'm pretty sure the Americans did it, but now they're claiming it was the Ukrainians. I don't know how the Ukrainians really managed to blow up the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. Of course, Kaja Kallas, the former Estonian Prime Minister, she was really against the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. She said it was a geopolitical structure and it should be closed down. But I'm not saying Estonians had anything to do with it. I'm sure it was the Americans, even though they claim it was the Ukrainians. But here is the chart for the blowing up of a Nord Stream 2 pipeline. It's somewhere off the coast of Denmark. And there you have Mercury opposite. Mercury was at 27 Virgo and Neptune was at 23 Pisces. So yes, you had a Mercury-Neptune opposition. And that's a perfect signature of the blowing up of the pipeline. And of course, I think there was a huge amount of gas that got released as a result of this event. So anyway, those are a few thoughts about Mercury opposition Neptune. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to switch to the I Ching. So, just a reminder that this I Ching reading is voluntary. I know you've been looking at this video. I mean, if you're watching me, you've obviously been watching what I've been saying about astrology. But it's up to you whether you want your I Ching to be read. If you don't want your I Ching to be read, you can just stop watching the video right now, because my forecast only applies to those who are watching the I Ching section. So this I Ching reading is in 4 sections: general, then money, then career, and then relationships. So I asked the question, what is the week starting on Monday, September the 23rd, 2024, going to be like for those watching the I Ching section of this video? And the first hexagram I got was, well, in fact, it was the only hexagram I got, because it actually has no moving lines. And what I got was standstill. So looking at standstill from a general perspective, this does indicate a week where we just can't expect much to happen. And because there are no moving lines, I think that might take away some of the intrinsic problems of standstills. Standstill can be a very difficult hexagram, and it can mean that there are things out there trying to hold us up. There are forces out there that may sort of wish us no good, but because it's locked, I'm just wondering how far that's going to actually go. It just may be that things really aren't moving, and so perhaps this relates to the fact that Venus has just moved into Scorpio, and it may be for some of us, it may be quite a shock for Venus to move into Scorpio. We've had Venus in Libra. Venus was nicely placed in Libra. Then it moves into Scorpio, and suddenly just nothing. Things come to a standstill. Venus in Scorpio, you can kind of see it as being like stuck in mud, perhaps. And yeah, people are emotional, but are those emotions helpful? Quite possibly not. And so we perhaps need to just accept that and not really have any big ambitions for the week ahead. Though there is a nuclear hexagram in here. I like to look at the nuclear hexagram when you've got a locked hexagram, and you just knock off the top and the bottom lines, and you just look at the 4 lines in the middle, and you take, if you take those 4 lines, you take the bottom 3 as the bottom trigram and the top 3 as the top trigram, and so you have as a nuclear hexagram 53, which is development. And that actually does give quite a positive spin on this. Now, this is not fast development. It's kind of development that takes place over time. And so underlying this standstill is the fact that we're perhaps learning from the experience. We understand what this standstill is all about. And yeah, it may feel that nothing's going on and that we're perhaps even wasting our time, but something else is learning a bit of patience. And I think if we see through this week, then things will start to move. Anyway, so that's the general view of this hexagram. Now, from a financial perspective, I think the message is probably pretty obvious. So if we are expecting money this week, then we might be disappointed. This might not be the week where it happens. Or we were expecting some progress. Perhaps we were hoping we'd get some more money, or we'd get some news about money. And it just might not be forthcoming. And there could be a certain sense of frustration. And also at the same time, if we're dealing with other people in a financial sense, we might just be aware that some people just aren't up to much good. And so we may feel that we have to perhaps protect ourselves. If someone has got a history of asking for money from us and they're turning up again, and we might feel that we just have to sort of push them back a little. But, whatever it is, we can't expect much to happen that is particularly good. And I think the best we can do is sort of protect ourselves from elements that might try to, undermine us financially, or try to get us to, give money which we don't want to give, either because we just don't want to give it, or perhaps we can't afford it for whatever reason. But still, I think there is a certain sort of learning process here because of a nuclear hexagram. I said the nuclear hexagram was development. And so, with this hexagram development, we get the idea that perhaps we can learn from the experience. And, when we start to realize perhaps that money isn't immediately available, we can start to make a few changes, and psychologically we can start to become more patient and have a sort of more sort of relaxed and sort of philosophical approach. And provided we don't panic, there is this sense that even though things seem to be at a standstill, we can actually start moving slowly towards achieving some of our financial goals. And maybe sort of next week might be the time when we can start to see real progress. As far as career, business, looking for a job, whatever, I would love to be more positive, but standstill is a standstill. So if you were expecting something to happen, perhaps you've applied for a job or you're waiting for an answer, I'm not convinced you're going to hear anything. Or if you do hear anything, I think it would not necessarily be good news. But standstill doesn't actually mean failure. It doesn't mean total rejection. It just means that things are not moving. And at the same time, you do have to be careful who you mix with. So from a business perspective, there may be people who have offers who you may want to meet and who you want to listen to their ideas. But standstill does indicate that not everyone can be trusted. And if we have any suspicion that someone can't be trusted, then we need to close the hatch, seal the doors, because we don't want disintegrating influences to get in our way and to undermine us. And so maybe from a business perspective, it's actually going to be quite important that we are self-sufficient, because I don't think we can fully trust other people to help us achieve our aims. And if we can do things on our own, then I think it's likely that we're going to be more successful and also more productive. And the underlying hexagram, the nuclear hexagram, is of course development, and that perhaps indicates that when we're on our own, when we're being realistic, when we perhaps understand that we're living in a difficult environment, then things are more likely to move and we're more likely to get our way. So I think there's kind of a silver lining there. So if we're on our own, if we're doing things our own way, and we're not reliant on other people's input, I just think it's more likely that will make progress. And finally, there's relationships. I understand that some people are interested in relationships for whatever reason, whether it's friends, romance, business partnerships, whatever. But with hexagram 12, I don't think you can expect very much from other people. Hexagram 12 is about separation. And it's almost about the value of separation. Because some people aren't any good for us. And that is an important message with standstill. There is a division between heaven and earth. You've got 3 unbroken lines at the top, 3 broken lines at the bottom. So it's like heaven and earth have nothing to do with each other. The good needs to separate itself from the bad because the good does not want to be contaminated by the bad. And so this may say something about our relationships. We may realize that, a lot of people are actually no good for us. If we have them if we bring these people into our lives, we're going to be undermined. We're going to be brought down to their level, however low that level might be. And so there's perhaps an indication that we need to sort of make a distinction between the higher and the lower. Who are these people who are bringing us down? We need to identify them. We can identify them. And we can create a social situation for ourselves which is more healthy. And it may be a case that less is more. If we just focus on the people who we can trust, we know we can trust, maybe 1 or 2 people, that is far better than 20 people who are just complete flakes. And I think that's supported by the nuclear hexagram, because the nuclear hexagram is 53, which is development. Yes, we might feel that nothing much is happening in terms of relationships, but we are developing. There is progress. And I think the reason there is progress is because we're just understanding who can be trusted, who cannot be trusted. We are making the right distinctions. And while this week may not be a bundle of laughs in terms of relationships, it may be a little bit grim, we are actually making good progress because we are creating a situation where we can be with people who we really can trust. Now, if you are in a situation where you're concerned about a long-term relationship, someone you're with, you've been with them for decades, of course this is a hexagram that only lasts for a week. It's just for the next week. And so if you've got someone who is important to you, they're not going anywhere, and you're trying to make progress, you're trying to improve a relationship, then it's going to be a slow process. And I think in the first instance with this hexagram 12, you just need to accept that you and this other person, however well you know them, there is a certain, I won't say incompatibility, but just right now there are differences of opinion, or maybe just your personalities aren't jiving with each other at the moment, and perhaps you just need to sit it out and understand the differences between you and another person. And then under the surface, if you're patient and tolerant, then we can move back to a nuclear hexagram, which is about things slowly developing in the right direction. And that is it. That is my treatment of the week starting on Monday, September the 23rd, 2024. And I hope you enjoyed this video. I'm sorry, maybe you didn't enjoy the video. I'm afraid the I Ching was a little bit downbeat, but I hope you found the video useful. If you did find the video useful, I'd be very grateful if you were to like it. And if you're not subscribed, I'd be very grateful if you were to subscribe. And if you want to buy me a coffee, there's a link in the description. So thank you very much for listening, and I'll talk to you again very soon.